In the shadowed outskirts of Willow Creek, where dense woods whispered secrets of the wild, 24-year-old Olivia wandered through the undergrowth, her heart heavy with the loneliness that had clung to her since her father's death a year ago. She'd always found solace in animals, volunteering at the local zoo, but nothing prepared her for the moment that would change her life. A chilling, desperate cry sliced through the gray dusk, stopping her in her tracks behind a tangle of fallen branches. A tiny lion cub trembled, its golden fur matted with mud, its wide eyes brimming with terror. Separated from its mother, the cub faced a cruel fate in the encroaching darkness, and Olivia's pulse raced with a fear she couldn't name. Could she save this fragile creature and find the courage to heal her own broken spirit? Have you ever felt a call to save someone in need? Like if Olivia's story grips you, and keep watching to see what happens next. Olivia stood frozen in the dim woods near Willow Creek, the lion cub's cries echoing through the trees like a haunting melody, each sound a dagger in her already fragile heart. The cub's golden fur was streaked with mud, its tiny body shivering as it pawed weakly at the fallen branches that trapped it, its dark eyes wide with a fear that mirrored the emptiness Olivia had felt since her father's passing. She'd spent countless hours at the zoo, learning about animals, but nothing had prepared her for this raw vulnerability, a wild creature, alone and helpless, facing a night it might not survive. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine, the sky above a bruised shade of gray, and the distant hoot of an owl reminded her how far they were from safety. Olivia's breath hitched, her mind racing with the weight of her father's last words to her. Be brave, live. Words she'd failed to live by as grief had consumed her, leaving her isolated and afraid to connect with anyone. She knelt slowly, her boots sinking into the muddy ground. Her hands trembling as she reached toward the cub, her voice a soft hum of reassurance meant as much for herself as for the animal. The cub flinched at first, its tiny claws digging into the earth, but its cries softened, its gaze locking onto hers with a desperate trust that made her chest ache. Olivia's fingers brushed against the branches, their rough bark scraping her skin as she worked to free the cub, her heart pounding with the fear of what might happen if she failed. She couldn't let this creature die, not when she saw her own loneliness reflected in its eyes, not when she'd already lost so much. The branches gave way with a snap, and the cub stumbled forward, its small frame collapsing against her, its warmth a stark contrast to the cold seeping through her jacket. But the woods were no place for a lion cub, and Olivia knew she couldn't handle this alone. The nearest help was the zoo, a mile away through the dense forest, and the thought of leaving the cub, even for a moment, filled her with dread. She scooped the cub into her arms, its soft fur tickling her chin, its heartbeat a faint rhythm against her own, and began the trek back, her boots slipping on the uneven ground as the last light of day faded. The cub's whimpers grew quieter, its body trembling less, but Olivia's anxiety only deepened. She'd heard stories of cubs dying without their mothers, their survival instincts too weak to endure. Her father had taught her to care for animals, to fight for them, but she'd never faced a challenge this real, this urgent. As she pushed through the underbrush, thorns snagging at her sleeves, Olivia's mind flashed to the zoo's headkeeper, Tom, a man who'd cared for lions for decades. She needed his expertise, his calm under pressure, but the journey felt endless, the forest stretching on like a labyrinth of shadows. The cub nuzzled closer, its tiny head resting against her shoulder, and Olivia felt a surge of determination. She wouldn't let her fear stop her. At this time, her father's words echoed again, a quiet mantra as she pressed forward. The zoo's gates, a distant beacon of hope in the darkening woods. She had to save this cub, not just for its sake, but to prove to herself that she could still be brave, that she could still fight for something worth saving. Olivia's arms ached as she carried the lion cub through the dense woods toward Willow Creek's zoo, the cub's golden fur warm against her chest, its tiny heartbeat a fragile reminder of the life she held in her hands. The forest was a maze of shadows, the air heavy with the scent of wet pine and the distant rumble of thunder, each step a battle against the uneven ground and her own rising panic. She'd left the safety of the zoo's familiar paths to walk home that evening, never imagining she'd find herself here, a mile from help, with a wild creature depending on her. The cub's dark eyes flicked up to hers, its fear softened by a trust that made Olivia's throat tighten. She hadn't felt this needed since before her father's death, when she'd shut herself off from the world, too afraid to let anyone close. Now, this tiny lion was breaking through her walls, its vulnerability a mirror to her own. The zoo's gates finally came into view, their iron bars a stark silhouette against the fading light, and Olivia's pace quickened, her boots crunching on gravel as she pushed through the staff entrance. The head keeper, Tom, was there, his weathered face etched with concern as she explained the cub's plight, her voice trembling with urgency. He nodded, his hands already gathering supplies, a blanket, a crate, a bottle of formula, his movements steady where Olivia's were frantic. Together, they hurried back through the woods, the cub nestled in Olivia's arms, its soft whimpers echoing in the stillness as the first drops of rain began to fall. The journey back felt faster, driven by the shared purpose between them, but Olivia's mind raced with doubt. What if they were too late? What if the cub's mother was gone for good? They reached the spot where she'd found the cub, the fallen branches still scattered across the muddy ground, but the cub's trembling had worsened, its tiny body chilled by the damp air. Tom knelt beside her, his hands gentle as he examined the cub, his brow furrowing as he noted its hunger and exhaustion. He confirmed it was only a few weeks old, too young to survive without care, and Olivia's heart sank at the realization that returning it to the wild might not be an option. The zoo was the safest place for now, but the thought of the cub growing up in a cage, far from the savannah it was born for, filled her with a grief she couldn't name. She thought of her father, how he'd taught her to love animals for their freedom, not their captivity, and the weight of that lesson pressed down on her as she watched Tom prepare to move the cub. Back at the zoo, they settled the cub into a temporary enclosure, a space filled with soft bedding and warmth, but Olivia couldn't shake the feeling of finality as she watched it curl up, its golden fur catching the dim light. She'd saved it from the woods, but at what cost? The cub needed more than safety. It needed a chance to be a lion, to run free, and Olivia knew that chance might come with a price she wasn't ready to pay. As she stood by the enclosure, her hand pressed against the glass, she felt the stirrings of a purpose. She thought she'd lost a purpose to fight for this cub, even if it meant letting go of the bond that had already begun to heal her. Have you ever faced a choice between safety and freedom? Like if you're rooting for Olivia, and share your toughest decision in the comments below. The rain poured down in sheets outside Willow Creek's zoo, the storm's roar, a stark contrast to the quiet hum of the enclosure where Olivia stood, her eyes fixed on the lion cub she'd rescued just hours ago. The cub's golden fur was cleaner now, its tiny body curled into a ball on a bed of straw, but its dark eyes still held a flicker of fear as it glanced up at her, seeking the comfort it had found in her arms. Olivia's heart ached with a mix of love and dread. She'd saved the cub from the woods, but the reality of its future loomed like the storm outside. Tom had been clear. Raising a lion cub in captivity was a temporary fix, but reintroducing it to the wild was fraught with danger, its survival instincts too fragile to withstand the savannah's harsh truths. Olivia's fingers pressed against the glass, her breath fogging the surface, as she wrestled with the choice that lay before her: keep the cub safe in a cage or risk everything to give it the freedom it deserved. Her mind flashed to her father, his voice a distant echo as he'd taught her about the beauty of wild things, their right to roam free, a lesson she'd buried under the weight of her grief after his death. She'd spent the last year hiding from the world, too afraid to let anyone in. But this cub had cracked open her heart, its trust in her a lifeline she hadn't known she needed. Now she faced a decision that felt like a betrayal of that trust. Keeping it here might save its life, but it would never be the lion it was meant to be. The thought of it pacing a cage for years, its wild spirit dimmed, made her stomach churn. But the alternative, releasing it into a world where it might not survive, felt like a gamble she couldn't bear to lose. Tom approached, his footsteps soft on the concrete floor, his expression a mix of concern and resolve as he shared a new possibility, a sanctuary in Africa, a place where the cub could learn to be a lion, surrounded by others of its kind, with a chance at reintroduction to the wild. The journey would be long, the risks high, but it was the only path that offered the cub a true future, one where it could run free under an endless sky. Olivia's chest tightened, her fear of losing the cub warring with the hope of giving it the life it deserved. She thought of her father's courage, the way he'd faced his illness with a bravery she'd never found in herself, and something shifted within her. She couldn't let fear dictate this choice, not when the cub's freedom hung in the balance. She turned to the cub, its eyes meeting hers through the glass, and in that moment, she made her decision. She would let it go, not because she wanted to, but because she loved it enough to give it what it needed most, a chance to be wild, to be free. Tears stung her eyes as she nodded to Tom, her voice a silent vow as she pressed her hand against the glass one last time. The cub's gaze a promise that their bond would endure, even across oceans and savannas. Weeks later, the sun rose over Willow Creek, its golden light filtering through the trees as Olivia stood at the zoo's gates, her heart a tangled mix of sorrow and hope. The lion cub she'd rescued was on its way to Africa, to a sanctuary where it could learn to be the lion it was born to be. And though the goodbye had torn at her, she knew it was the right choice. She'd spent days preparing for the moment, watching the cub grow stronger in its enclosure, its golden fur catching the light as it played with a ball of straw. Its dark eyes no longer filled with fear, but with a spark of wildness that made her both proud and ache with longing. The memory of its final nudge against her hand, its soft warmth, a fleeting comfort, lingered as she watched the truck disappear down the road, carrying the cub to a future she could only imagine. The zoo felt quieter without the cub, its enclosure now empty, but Olivia found a new rhythm in her days, her grief for her father softened by the purpose the cub had given her. She'd spent the last year hiding from life, her loneliness a wall she couldn't breach, but the cub had taught her to be brave, to love deeply even when it meant letting go. She threw herself into her work at the zoo, helping other animals with a renewed sense of purpose. Her father's words, "Be brave, live," a mantra that guided her through each day. The cub had shown her that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it, and in saving its life, she'd begun to save her own. Months later, a letter arrived from the sanctuary, its words a balm to the ache in Olivia's heart. The cub was thriving, running through the savannah with a new pride, its golden coat shimmering under the African sun as it hunted and played, a true lion at last. Olivia's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness but of joy, knowing she'd given it the greatest gift of all, freedom. She pictured it racing across the grasslands, its roar echoing through the vastness, a sound of triumph that mirrored the peace she'd found within herself. The bond they'd shared had transformed her, teaching her that love sometimes meant letting go, and that true connection could endure even across continents. Did Olivia and the cub's journey inspire you? Like if their story touched your heart, share it to spread hope, and comment below what's the hardest goodbye you've ever faced. Subscribe for more stories of courage and freedom.